As World of Warcraft has aged, many famous, well-crafted raids have come and gone. The dark and sinister halls of the necropolis Naxxramas, all the way to the twisted realm of Nilotha itself. But one raid remains ever a reminder that content can be so much more than just progression, and that there is a true art in crafting some of these dungeons. Dare I say it may just very well be WoW's greatest raid, and one of, if not the greatest MMO instance ever created. Heck, a lot of people seem to think so, and I can't really argue with them. I am of course talking about Ruby Sanctum.
Stop it. Get some help.
That joke never gets old. No, I'm talking about Karazhan, the great castle of Medivh, the guardian of Treesful. A true showing of entertainment, and more importantly, a piece of artistic video game history. But what makes Kara so great? Up there with raids like Naxx, Ulduar, and Blackrock Foundry, if not better. What makes it so timeless when other raids have faded from people's joys and cares? What makes Kara, well, Kara? Well, to figure that out, it's best we apply the dungeon and raid fundamentals to it, and see how it stacks up, namely in its design, which means its overall aesthetic ideas, themes, and atmosphere, its layout, in other words, how players navigate from point A to point B and so on, and its boss design, namely its ability to produce bosses that keep players engaged with either challenging or fun mechanics. But in addition, I want to add one more category to those big three. That category being difficulty and accessibility, something that may not be such a big deal post its content period, but I nonetheless believe it will be important to explaining why Karazhan is so great. Karazhan means a lot to me as a WoW veteran, and I'm sure it means a lot to some of you as well, and with Burning Crusade Classic right around the corner, I see no better time than now to shine a spotlight on it and talk about why Karazhan might just be WoW's greatest raid. So before we begin, just wanted to do a quick info dump on what exactly Karazhan is. Karazhan is the first raid released for the Burning Crusade expansion of World of Warcraft, which being the first expansion means Kara was the first ever expansion added raid. Despite it being planned to be released in vanilla, it was eventually pushed back to the first raid of Burning Crusade, but the intention to put it in vanilla alone would explain why its design more closely mimics vanilla raids and not Burning Crusade. I personally find this to be a good call on Blizzard's part, not just because it gave them more time to iron out its kinks, but in addition, releasing it as the first raid of BC meant it kinda served as an anchoring point for old World of Warcraft zones. Keep in mind, nowadays players aren't really pushed to revisit old content, except for like leveling and for getting collectibles like Transmog. And flying in Azeroth didn't exist yet at this point, meaning you were venturing to Karazhan the old-fashioned way. This may seem cumbersome to new players, but I'd argue this anchoring property really helps to make the whole world part of World of Warcraft feel a tad more legit. One last little bit about its creation. It seems Karazhan was actually created by the conjoined efforts of John Statz and Aaron Keller. For those of you who don't know John Statz, he did a lot of dungeon design in vanilla WoW and was notorious for his maze-like dungeon themes. He did dungeons like Wailing Caverns, Blackrock Depths, and Sholomance, some of my personal favorites. And Aaron Keller, also known as the City Guy, is renowned within Blizzard for crafting some of its most memorable cities, such as Stormwind, Thunderbluff, and my personal favorite of his creations, Ironforge. These two powerhouses working together explains why Karazhan has such a unique and well-made design and layout, feeling like a lived-in location while also being an extremely well put together raid as well. For those of you who don't know anything about Karazhan lore-wise, it was the home of Medivh, the last guardian of Treesful, a powerful line of mages known to pass on their abilities to the next guardian. Medivh used the Tower of Karazhan as a magical base, where under the possession of the Dark Titan Sargeras, he kicked off the Orc War on the continent of Eastern Kingdoms, before eventually being slain by his own apprentice Khadgar, otherwise known as Dadgar, and Anduin Lothar. Though he was slain, the tower itself continued to exist in Deadwind Pass, silent, sleeping, but ever powered by the ancient magic ley lines that lay beneath it, until one day it was reawoken. Something new and horrifying stirred within it, and it was the player's turn to venture into those haunted halls and find out its many mysteries. Well, that about covers the early info dump about Kara's backstory. Let's talk Raid. And what better place to start than the design, the heart and soul of artistic vision in instances. Design helps players to get immersed in content as they progress through it. Without good design, raids and dungeons can become boring and stale, oftentimes leaving a bad taste in players' minds forever. Lucky us, Karazhan is godly in this department. Now when I say design, it means several different pieces of content. Namely its overall artistic aesthetic and its general atmosphere and music. As I've already mentioned, Kara is a haunted castle, and so naturally it's really going to push that standard creepy ghost mansion vibe pretty much all throughout. And considering it's a rather long dungeon, you're going to be seeing it a lot. But what I love is that Karazhan uses an array of complex ideas and themes to prevent this rather long raid from becoming stale. While it does go for a standard ghost house look, it's also clever enough to actually design sections of the raid around real locations a place like this would have, if it was ever going to have people living here. It has a horse stables, a kitchen area, a dancing and dining hall, an opera house, heck, it even has a giant library, which makes sense considering the last owner was quite the mage. The decision to actually design each section as a unique looking theme, instead of just constant haunted castle, is a smart choice as it gives players something new to look at and discover, and all while maintaining its horror castle design. In addition to having a unique variety of set pieces that fit in with the castle design, Kara is also smart enough in its design to shift to a more otherworldly, surrealist appearance for its second half. I've said it on this channel many times, but I really love the parts of this dungeon that are very spatially warped. It's like the laws of physics just don't exist here anymore. It's like Salvador Dali and MC Escher had a brunch and they were just like, hey, I got an idea. Karazhan. This sudden change in design, I believe, helps to create a sense of mystery and surprise in the players that most raids just don't really contest. I mean, it's one thing to have a design that changes as the raid progresses, but it's another to maintain the original themes while said change occurs. This was brave of Blizzard to do this, and it's masterclass raid design in my opinion. In addition to its themes, its overall music and atmosphere are the stuff of legends. Building further on its haunted house vibes, Karazhan really sells a mixture of horror meets charming, often filled with spooky set pieces and humorous dialogue. This helps to make the players wary of their surroundings and really gives that scary location vibe, while also easing the player into a comfortable setting, which is super weird to mix together, but I really love it. Karazhan's lovely music helps to bolster these atmospheric themes. Let's have a listen real quick. First, something a bit more spooky. And now let's try something a bit more quirky. It's these lovely tunes, as well as Karazhan's consistent jumps between the strange and the surreal that help to sell players on an atmosphere you really can't find in many other dungeons. An atmosphere that's telling you to stay away, while also welcoming you with open arms. All these things together create a very living, breathing world for you to venture through. Karazhan may be an undead haunted castle, but it genuinely feels like it's still alive and kicking. People dancing, cooking and cutting meat, prepping for dinner, watching opera. The thick atmosphere and the on-point set pieces really create a world I want to venture through, even if I have to kill pretty much everyone in my path to do so. With such fantastic and immersive raid design, its layout is going to also need to be really interactive, or they pretty much wasted the art team's wonderful time. Lucky us, it's one of the last true complex raid designs in World of Warcraft. I mentioned earlier that Karazhan's design and layout was the brainchild of Aaron Keller, aka the City Guy, and John Statz, and both are renowned among older WoW players for their more complex design choices. Something you really just don't see in MMOs nowadays. And while people may sometimes complain that their dungeons and city layouts were too complex, I'd argue that part of the fun of exploring a new world is, well, you know, the whole exploring bit. Something the new dungeons and raids are oftentimes seriously lacking. Not you, Blackrock Foundry, you're beautiful. John Statz made the OG Wailing Caverns, and Aaron Keller made the pre-Cataclysm Stormwind, so it's no surprise that some of their maze-like themes would be found all over Karazhan. Yet even with all this complex traversing design, Karazhan is remarkably smart and understandable. Right out the gate, the gate. You're in the front hall, a giant archway before you is the obvious route you should take to press forward. But Karazhan hasn't even started yet. Not a single boss or piece of trash's corpse lie on the floor before, why yes, split pathing. A path to your right and a path to your left. One leading to the servants' quarters and the other leading to the stables. But we aren't done yet. Branching paths in raids is not really that big of a surprise. In fact, raids still do this to this date. But what's not so common nowadays in raiding is paths leading to, well, other paths. This is where Karazhan's layout really shines. No path is truly wrong. If you go through the stables, you'll find yourself in an armory area with soldiers before eventually being led to the kitchen and then to the dining hall where you can fight the first mandatory boss, Morose. But if you would prefer a different route, going through the archway I mentioned earlier leads you to the dance hall right away, which is beside said dining hall with Morose. It's faster to go this route, but you skip bosses with extra loot as well as trash to do this. Karazhan's layout naturally encourages exploration, but also rewards players who consistently press on with shortcuts and new routes to other sections of the raid, hardly ever forcing you to double back at the end of a hallway. But in addition, sometimes exploration also reveals one of the many optional bosses Karazhan houses, such as Ilhoof, who's hidden behind an actual bookcase in the second half. I mentioned this early section of Karazhan's complex raid design, but honestly the whole raid is full of things like this, allowing players to carve their own paths as they venture through this haunted world. Of course, in addition to unique pathing that rewards players with exploration on a horizontal plane, Karazhan is quite vertically built as well. I mean, it is a castle after all. But unlike a lot of big locations in raiding that artificially escalate players to upper paths, Karazhan leaves it to you to climb the old-fashioned way, packing in 7 stories of content. I mean, it's quite amazing to know you started out on the ground level of a dancing hall, cutting your way through, only to end up on the upper sections of the castle through natural means of walking. There is a lot to explore and discover here, and it's all extremely memorable and fun to venture through. Of course, the raid layout and design can be good, but the real reason any of us go to a raid to begin with is to experience its boss fights, and Karazhan doesn't disappoint. Keep in mind, this is still an earlier raid, so you guys and gals who are experiencing this on Burning Crusade for the first time in Classic need to remember it's not nearly as complex as current Mythic raid content. But I'd argue that's also not what the developers were going for either. The bosses are all simplistic but mechanically diverse, and more so than that, they are downright unique a lot of times, never really being truly emulated in future raids. Remember that while Kara is older, that it still came out after Naxxramas, which greatly changed how raid boss mechanics were used. Gone were the days of focusing on the boss itself, mechanics were now diverse and oftentimes entire boss arenas could be tied to a mechanic if need be. Bosses like Morose, who actually work sort of like a player character rogue, vanishing around the room and even gouging or corroding your raid, is an interesting spin on the player-themed boss encounters. Or the dragon Netherspite, who produces 4 unique colored beams that the players will need to soak to prevent the boss from getting them and getting buffed out of control. Outside of standard fare bosses, Kara also has 2 of the most unique and fun boss fights in the history of the game: Opera Event and Chess Event. Opera Event is a random style boss that can produce one of 3 boss encounters a week for a raid core: Big Bad Wolf, which is based off Little Red Riding Hood, Wizard of Oz, which is, well, the Wizard of Oz, and Romulo and Julian, which is based off of Romeo and Juliet. In addition to its unique 3-boss setup, each fight is decently different from one another and quite a bit of fun to do on their own. I'll never forget the first time I turned into Red Riding Hood and the big bad wolf started chasing me. I had such a huge surge of laughter and fear swell through my body, it was honestly great. The other boss I mentioned, Chess Event, is legendary among WoW raiders and honestly just the community as a whole, as it's an actual chess boss fight where you get to control the pieces. Oh, and it's basically Wizard's Chess from Harry Potter. Despite being really easy by comparison to other bosses that came before it, and being found rather late in the raid, I appreciate Blizzard for including this boss as it breaks up the grind of boss killing, which can build up quickly in such a long raid like Kara. And heck, you can even play both sides of the board, player versus player style, after you beat the encounter, which is a really great idea. I specifically haven't mentioned them yet, but there are 2 encounters that I want to talk about and give special kudos to just for being such great standard fare bosses, namely Nightbane and Kara's final boss, Prince Malakazar. Prince Malakazar is a rather fun final encounter that utilizes some great mechanics while also having a very haunting but epic battle arena to fight him in. Pretty early on in his encounter, you'll notice abyssals fall from the sky, and while they don't directly aggro onto you, they do produce an AoE effect on the ground. But that's weird, it doesn't do really that much damage. And then Malakazar plays his hand. Using an ability called Enfeeble, he will reduce half your raid to 1 health, which stays this way for a short time. And suddenly those abyssals are literal one-shot mines plastered all around the arena. Man, that's a cool idea and I just love it. It really makes you have to pay attention to the arena around you, as it is constantly fighting against you in this boss encounter. The other boss, Nightbane, is just as epic as Prince, but with the added bonus of being a hard mode style encounter. Well, sort of at least. In order to fight the undead dragon, you'll need to do a quest line to retrieve the urn needed to summon him, which I really like because it means even after you finish Kara for the first time, that there is still work needed to be done in the raid. Oh, but be ready because Nightbane is no joke and is easily one of, if not Kara's hardest boss fight. Karazhan has such a vibrant amount of boss encounters, from the standard options of tanking and dodging abilities, to the more challenging bosses that really push your skills, all the way to the bosses that are just there to let you have a little breather and a nice bit of fun. Meaning chances are, there's a little something for everyone in this raid. Normally this would be the part where I sum up why Kara is such an amazing raid instance, but there is still one more section I want to talk about, namely difficulty and accessibility. If I haven't made it known yet, then allow me to do so now. Kara is really easy. No joke, it's one of the easiest raids ever made, and while this may seem to be a detriment to most players who haven't experienced it, I'd argue it made sense considering Blizzard was clearly moving in a new direction away from vanilla. Bosses were a lot more complex than they used to be, and to avoid the huge challenge and lack of player participation of Naxxramas, Blizzard opted to lower the tuning of a lot of Karazhan's content to make it more accessible in the grand scheme of things. But while Karazhan's bosses are easier than what came before, or even after it, it's still got a nice progressive difficulty curve that keeps cores challenged as they progress through it. In addition to difficulty helping to make Kara more accessible, Blizzard also was in the process of changing the size of raid cores needed to do dungeons, with plans to drop the intended number of players from 40 to 25. This may seem jarring to some people, but it was honestly a good call as it allowed for Blizzard to focus more on larger scale mechanics, as well as 25 players being easier to recruit for guilds than 40 was. Of course, Karazhan wasn't a 25 player raid either, and as the first raid of Burning Crusade, Blizzard opted to make it a 10-person raid, as 10-player groups were easier to put together for all new players joining the WoW community come BC. I think this was an insanely smart call on Blizzard's behalf, and a huge reason why so many veterans love Kara so much. It was a lot of people's first raid, and if it was a 25 or even 40-man raid, they may not have got to experience it. Likewise, if it was as challenging as Naxxramas for instance, they may not have had nearly as fond of memories of it as they would have been constantly wiping to the high difficulty curve. Of course, with lower threshold for players needed and a lower tier difficulty, it means Kara was quite easy to pug, at least up to Curator, for most groups, making another unique way Kara was accessible to WoW players on such a large scale. In retrospective, I don't think every raid could pull this off, and I could only see Blizzard doing something like this once or twice every expansion, as high tier difficulty will always be a large attractor to most WoW raiders. But I have to commend Blizzard on attempting to get returning and new players pumped up for what was to come. You know, just some of the hardest raids in WoW history, no big deal. In a lot of ways it's kind of funny. Burning Crusade ended with Sunwell Plateau, one of if not WoW's hardest raid, but it also began with one of the easiest out of Karazhan. Karazhan is a true testament to perfect raid design, featuring extremely memorable set pieces, as well as a raid that feels like a real breathing world and not just a vessel for raids to clear out and move through. Its classic horror themes and charming, clever concepts help to merge together and create an experience you really can't find in any other raid. Its layout was maze-like in a lot of ways, being John Stat's last real mark on World of Warcraft, but that maze-like design often gave players landmarks as to avoid confusing them, meaning you were going to have fun exploring without the fear of getting terribly lost. And all while rewarding with secrets and some of the best boss fights in WoW history. Not just tank and spanks, these bosses had a lot of heart poured into them, and felt unique and like they were all sculpted with our enjoyment in mind. Karazhan was also pretty easy difficulty-wise, but never felt like it was doing this because Blizzard felt like players were stupid. It felt like the beginning of what was to come, and sure enough, it was followed by Tier 5, one of the most insanely challenging tiers ever released. And even though Karazhan was easy, it offered an extremely generous difficulty curve that scaled as players climbed further, only dipping to allow players breathers on the more unique bosses like Opera or Chess Event, before going full throttle again. Its change in raid core size to 10-man down from 40 was a good partnering idea with the lower difficulty, helping to make one of, if not the most approachable raid in WoW history, allowing all kinds of new and old raiders alike a chance to climb this massive raid. If it isn't obvious why Karazhan is so great, I hope this video helps you to see why Kara is easily one of, if not World of Warcraft's greatest raid, and a true piece of video game history. Well, did you like the video? If so, why not subscribe and check out some of my other videos? Of course, I want to hear all about your feelings and experiences in Karazhan, not just the original, but also in the Burning Crusade Classic version, as well as those who delved into the dungeon version of Kara in the Return of Kara in Legion, which I didn't talk about here, but is still a great dungeon as well as a good reminder that even Blizzard loves Karazhan. Well, I'm Captain Potato, and I'll see you guys next time, next video.